Hey guys, welcome to What in the World, the Electricity Series. So in the Electricity Series, we're going to answer your question of what is electricity? We're going to go through history, we're going to look at the timeline of electricity, where we first observed it, how we researched it and created electricity, we made some electricity, and used electricity. So you may have already been shocked by static electricity. Have you ever been down one of those plastic sliding boards and touched somebody at the end and gotten shocked? Or have you ever walked across carpet in your socked feet and touched a light switch and got shocked? That is static electricity. Have you ever been near the clothes dryer when clothes have come out and they stick together, and when you pull them apart, you hear a little popping? That is static electricity. There's electricity all around us, really. Our bodies operate on a small millivolt of electricity. We send signals, your body sends signals through your body with electricity. So there's electricity all around us. You may very well have been shocked by some static electricity. What you don't want to be shocked by, static electricity, is lightning. Lightning is static electricity, and you don't want to mess with that. So the first thing we want to do when we're talking about electricity is talk about safety. First of all, electricity can burn you. Electricity is dangerous. That's why the people who write the National Electrical Code, how we design buildings to keep them safe, is the NFPA. You see that little NFPA and fire symbol? That's the National Fire Protection Association. So electricity can burn you. You don't want to get burned by electricity. Electricity can stop your heart. That is not good. You do not want a lot of electricity flowing through your body. It can stop your heart. Makes for a bad day. Electricity can blow up, much like lightning. What if you've heard thunder or seen lightning? That is an explosion of electricity. You don't want to mess with that. When we work with electricity, professionals who work with electricity, we put on PPE. That is personal protective equipment. And what that involves is a great deal of protective equipment. First of all your clothes have to be either cotton or wool. They can't be nylon or polyester. Why? Because in an explosion of electricity, nylon and polyester won't burn off you, it will melt onto you. So cotton and wool will just burn off you in an explosion or a violent arc flash of electricity. So you want to start with the clothes you put on, or cotton or wool. You put on coveralls that are fire retardant. You put on a hard hat. You put on safety glasses, hearing protection, a face shield. I think I said safety glasses. You put on safety shoes. You put on rubber gloves that are pretty thick, and then you put on leather gloves over that. So it's involved when you work on anything over 50 volts. The people who write the code to keep us all safe says anytime you work on electricity over 50 volts, you need to put on PPE, or this personal protective equipment. So electricity is dangerous. Don't play with electricity. So I want to show you some examples of electricity out of control. What we try to do is keep electricity in control. When it gets out of control, that's when it's dangerous. So what I have here is a simple 9-volt battery. A 9-volt battery can start a fire. Here I have an Don't do this at home. Do not try this at home. The only time you should work with electricity is when you have a parent or an adult supervising you. It's fine to work with electricity. You'll see a lot of electricity experiments through this series of electricity series. We'll have about 20 stations. We'll do different things with electricity, but don't play with electricity. So don't do this at home. So I'm going to take this 9-volt battery, and I have some steel wool here. So if you'll watch, do you see that there are 3 things I want you to pay attention to? If you see what happens when I touch this battery to this steel wool, first you see a light. You see that light there? That is, it is fire, but it is a light. What I want to show you is in 1801, a fella in England named Sir Humphrey Davy worked with electricity to make an incandescent lamp. Incandescent, the word incandescence means glowing. So if you see here, you see this is a clear 60-watt lamp. I've got it hooked up to a Lionel train transformer. So this puts out just 20 volts. So this is safe. So if you'll notice, the filament inside this lamp is glowing. This is how incandescent lamps work. I'm changing the voltage there. It's off. Now I'm increasing it, and you'll see it start to glow. That filament, and if you'll notice, let me turn it up. It's as high as it will go. That's about 20 volts. If you'll notice, when I touch the lamp, it shakes. That filament is tungsten. If you'll see the reflection to the left there, that's the reflection of the filament. It's like a spring. It's a coil of wire, of tungsten wire. So it's very fragile. You could bump this and break that filament. But that is one thing I want you to observe in this experiment of this 9-volt battery is the incandescent, making light out of it. Now, like I said, in 1801, an English fellow named Sir Humphrey Davy created the first incandescent lamp. The problem was it was in open air. He used platinum, I believe, which today is very expensive. And the problem was when he applied voltage to it, it burned, it glowed, so it burned for a short time before it just melted. So the next thing, and that was in 1801, it took another 80 years. Thomas Edison developed the working incandescent lamp about 1879. After 200 tries, Thomas Edison invented the working incandescent lamp. The other thing I want to show you with this, if you'll notice, this wire, it is steel wool, this wire just burns up. My voltage is getting low in here, but if you'll notice, this just burns up. This is similar to what a fuse does. What is a fuse? This is a fuse. This is the kind of fuse that you would have seen in your great-grandmother's house. If you'll notice, if you look down in there, you'll see a piece of metal, a piece of wire. That is the metal piece of wire that would melt when too much electricity went through here. So it would blow the fuse. Blow the fuse means it would open the circuit, so no more electricity would flow because something's pulling too much electricity. But that would melt. Here's another fuse. This is a small fuse. We used to use these in automobiles. If you'll see that metal right there, this is in glass. The other one was in glass also, but you'll see that piece of metal. That would melt when too much electricity flowed through it. Here's another type of fuse that we use in automobiles now, in our cars. If you'll see the little piece of metal in there, this is a 15 amp fuse. But if you'll see that little piece of metal in there, if too much electricity flowed through this fuse, that would melt and it would open the circuit, so it would be safe. So the other thing that I want to show you in this experiment with electricity regarding safety is that it starts a fire. It starts a fire. Even a 9-volt battery, if you were to buy a brand new 9-volt battery and toss it in a drawer of keys, excuse me, if you were to buy a 9-volt battery, a new 9-volt battery, and toss it in a drawer with keys or other metal objects, if they shorted these two terminals, it could start a fire. This is how dangerous electricity is. So the point being, don't play with electricity. You can get burned, you can start a fire, or you can be electrocuted. So don't play with electricity. Now, that being said, I want to show you a high voltage of electricity. What I have here, this, we'll go over this in detail later on, but what I have here is a Leyden jar. A Leyden jar stores electricity. A Leyden jar is what Ben Franklin used many years ago to prove that lightning is electricity. When he flew the kite, Ben Franklin, you may have heard of him, but when Ben Franklin flew the kite, he stored some of the electricity from that key on the string in a Leyden jar. So what I'm doing here, I have a child's toy, a fly stick, and I'll go into detail what this is later, but I'm charging this Leyden jar that I have made. And this might take a minute. This will take a minute to charge it. But I want to show you what electricity out of control looks like. It looks much like lightning. But I'm charging this Leyden jar. And again, do not try this at home. So I'm going to charge this Leyden jar. Okay, I think that's charged enough for this experiment, just to show you what electricity is. And again, we'll go over the Leyden jar in detail a little bit later. But I did want to show you, if you'll pay attention to the two spheres, that is electricity. That spark, that arc, that's an electrical arc. That is what you do not want to play with. You don't want to play with electricity. So now that we've gone over the safety issues with electricity, let's dig into electricity a little bit more. Okay guys, welcome back to What in the World, the electricity series. Next, we are going to do some work with water. You might ask, what in the world has water got to do with electricity? Well, we're going to find out. We want to learn three terms we use in electricity a lot. We want to learn what volts is, what amps is, and what watts is. So to do that, I have a syringe and some water here and some tubes. So we're going to start off with a large tube here. I'm going to get some water in the syringe. And we'll start off. What we want to do here is just gently, of course we have the syringe, I'm just going to gently press on the syringe And you'll see the water's just barely coming out. It's just barely coming out. It just drizzles out. Okay, let's get some more water back in the syringe. I put very little pressure on the syringe, so the water just slowly came out. Now, I'm going to put more pressure on the syringe. Watch this. It filled up that cup pretty quick. So with just a little bit of pressure on the syringe, the water just drips out. Just a little bit of pressure, the water just drips out. But if I put a lot of pressure on the syringe, the water just gushes out. So what that shows is the more pressure you put on the syringe, the quicker the water comes out. The more force behind the water, the more pressure. In water, we call that PSI, pounds per square inch, more force. So the volts in electricity is like the pressure in water. The more volts we have pushing electricity, the more electricity flows over the wire. That's another thing. Water goes inside a pipe. Electricity flows on the outside of wire. It flows on the surface of wire. So the more volts, it's like the more pressure in water. So volts to electricity is like pressure is to water. The more force you put on the water, the faster it comes out. The more volts you put on the electricity, the faster the electricity flows. So remember that. So that's why in your house, the electricity outside that comes to your house, there's a transformer somewhere, and it's the voltage going to that transformer is in the thousands of volts. And it gets more electricity to that transformer. Then the transformer reduces the voltage down to a safer voltage, 120 and 240 volts. So your house is served by 120 volts and 240 volts. We'll get into that later, but just know that there's a higher voltage serving your neighborhood to force the electricity, more electricity to serve your neighborhood. When it gets to your house, we lower the voltage to make it safer, so it's not quite as much force. So volts forces electricity. It's the electromotive force, just like pressure is to water. So now let's look at another experiment. We're going to get the water back in our syringe. And if you'll notice how the size of this tube, it's pretty big. It's pretty big. So when we put a lot of force behind this water, a lot of water comes out of this tube. Now, if we change the size of the tube to a smaller tube, you can see the difference here in the size of these tubes. One's pretty big and one is pretty small. That's a pretty small tube. So let's try forcing this water out with this pretty small tube here. Here we go. We're going to let it drizzle with just low pressure. So that's low pressure. Let's apply a little bit more force to it. Still, it comes out faster, but only so much water flows through this tiny little tube. So only so much water can come out of a small tube. So this is much like the size of wire. So a larger wire, like a larger tube, will carry more electricity, will carry more amps. Amps is the measure of the flow of electrons. We'll get into that later, but we're just trying to establish these three terms: volts, amps, and watts. We've covered volts. It's the force or pressure behind the electricity. Now we're looking at amps. So the larger the wire is like the larger the tube. The smaller the wire is like the smaller the tube. Only so many amps can go over small wire. It's much like the fuse. That's what the fuse is for. If you size a wire to be small, you don't want but so much electricity or amps flowing over it. So if there are too many amps flowing over that wire or through that fuse is going to blow. It's going to open up and open the circuit so no more electricity flows. So much like a small tube only carries so much water, a small wire will only carry so much amps. A larger tube will carry more water, a larger wire will carry more amps. So we've covered volts and amps. Now, watts. What is watts like compared to water? Watts is much like the quantity of water, whether you have it in a large tube or large wire or a small tube or a small wire. The ultimate supply is watts. So where volts is like the pressure behind water, amps is like the size of the tube, how much water will flow through the tube. When you collect a gallon of water, that is very similar to watts. A watt, there are 746 watts in 1 horsepower. We'll talk about watts and horsepower later on, but we want to cover these three terms. Volts, the electromotive force. Amps is the measure of electrons flowing over the wire. And watts is the ultimate power that you end up with in the cup, so to speak. So that covers volts, amps, and watts. Now, we're going to move on to when electricity was first observed. Even though somebody that observed it didn't know what it was, we're going to start our march through the timeline of history and electricity. Be right back.